Jonathan the billionaire saw his maid sleeping on a bench in the park. What he did next is what no one expected. "What are you doing out here in the cold?" The question escaped Jonathan's lips before he could stop it, his voice cutting through the September night air like a blade through silk. Victoria's eyes snapped open, her body tensing on the park bench where she'd been sleeping. For 3 years, she had been invisible in his mansion, cleaning his marble floors, preparing his coffee, existing in the careful space between noticed and unseen. Now, caught in this moment of raw vulnerability with her life packed into 2 battered suitcases, she stared at the billionaire who had never once asked her name. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent witnesses to the collision of 2 worlds that should never have met. Yet here they were, employer and employee, wealth and want, privilege and desperation, about to discover that sometimes the most unexpected encounters change everything. Victoria had cleaned blood from his marble floors, tears from his silk sheets, but he'd never seen her face until he found her sleeping beneath the stars. The morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Beacon Hill mansion, casting geometric shadows across Persian rugs that cost more than most people's annual salaries. Victoria Williams moved through the rooms like a ghost in her crisp uniform, her dark hands steady as she dusted priceless artifacts and straightened throw pillows that would never know the weight of anyone's actual rest. She had worked for the Ashworth family for 3 years, yet her existence registered somewhere between the automatic coffee maker and the security system, functional, reliable, invisible. Each morning at 6 sharp, she entered through the service entrance, her footsteps silent on imported Italian tiles. Each evening at 7, she vanished back into a world that might as well have been another planet. At 42, Victoria carried herself with the kind of quiet dignity that comes from surviving disappointments without becoming bitter. Her grandmother's voice still echoed in her memory. "Baby girl, your worth ain't in what folks see on the outside. It's in how you treat people when nobody's watching." Those words had carried her through her divorce, through losing her teaching job during budget cuts, through swallowing her master's degree in education to accept work that paid the bills. Well, most of the bills. She paused at the window overlooking the private garden, watching expensive sprinklers water flowers that would bloom for no one. Her reflection stared back, tired eyes in a face that had learned to smile politely while calculating whether to pay rent or electricity this month. The decision had been made for her yesterday when her landlord's eviction notice appeared on her door like a death sentence wrapped in legal language. 3 miles away, in the glass tower that bore his family name, Jonathan Ashworth stood at his corner office window, watching the city wake up 30 floors below. At 38, he had inherited not just wealth but the weight of expectation. Every decision scrutinized by board members who remembered his father, every relationship analyzed for fortune-hunting motives. The morning merger documents lay untouched on his desk while he nursed his 3rd cup of coffee, black and bitter as his mood. His phone buzzed with texts from Miranda, his social climbing fiancée, planning their engagement party with the enthusiasm of a military campaign. Each message felt like another brick in the wall he'd built around his heart. "The Rothschild ballroom is available," she'd written. "Caviar service for 300. Don't forget, smile for the cameras." Jonathan deleted the message without responding. Through his window, he could see people hurrying to work, carrying coffee cups and dreams he couldn't remember having. When had his life become a series of board meetings and charity galas where everyone knew his net worth, but nobody knew his middle name? His assistant knocked and entered without waiting. "The car's ready for your lunch meeting with the Japanese investors." "Cancel it," Jonathan said, surprising himself. "Cancel everything today." She blinked. "Sir? I need to walk." For the first time in years, Jonathan Ashworth left his tower and walked among regular people. He noticed things, the way strangers held doors for each other, how a street musician's saxophone painted melancholy across the afternoon air. He found himself in Boston Common, where families spread blankets and children chased pigeons with pure joy. He had no idea that 10 minutes away, Victoria sat on a different bench with her life folded into 2 suitcases and a broken heart, watching the same children and wondering if she'd ever have a home again. Neither knew that by sunset, their separate worlds would collide in a way that would change everything they thought they knew about love, dignity, and what it meant to truly see another human being. The universe, it seemed, had been waiting for this moment all along. The park bench felt like the edge of the world. Victoria had been walking for hours after the shelter turned her away. Full capacity, they'd said, with the same apologetic smile she'd perfected for other people's messes. Her feet ached in shoes designed for marble floors, not city sidewalks. The suitcases felt heavier with each block, weighted down not just with her belongings, but with the crushing reality that she had nowhere to go. The bench sat beneath an old oak tree in a quiet corner of Boston Common, far from the playground's laughter and the main walking paths. Victoria had discovered it months ago during her lunch breaks, a pocket of peace where she could eat her sandwich and pretend, just for 30 minutes, that she wasn't racing against time to clean another stranger's life. Now it might be her bedroom. She arranged her suitcases like a privacy barrier and lay down, using her winter coat as a blanket despite the warm September evening. The stars were barely visible through the city's glow, but she found comfort in trying to count them, a meditation her grandmother had taught her during the difficult nights after her parents died. When you can't see tomorrow, baby girl, just look up. The same stars that shine on your troubles shine on your blessings too. Sometimes they're the same thing. Victoria closed her eyes and let exhaustion win. For the first time in months, she wasn't serving someone else's needs, wasn't calculating whether she had enough quarters for the bus, wasn't smiling when she wanted to scream. She was just a woman under an ancient tree, dreaming of having a key to her own door again. Jonathan had been walking for hours, his expensive suit wrinkled and tie loosened. He'd turned off his phone after Miranda's 15th call about centerpieces and caterers. The city felt different at ground level, more real, more urgent. He'd stopped at a food truck and bought coffee from a vendor who didn't recognize him, savoring the anonymity. His feet carried him to Boston Common, where the evening joggers were giving way to couples holding hands and late-night dog walkers. He'd played here as a child, before boarding schools and business dinners consumed his life. The memory felt like touching something through glass, present but unreachable. He chose a path that wound through the older section of the park, where streetlights created pools of amber warmth between long stretches of shadow. That's when he saw her. At first, his mind couldn't process what he was seeing. The woman on the bench lay curled on her side, her dark skin luminous in the lamplight, using a coat as a makeshift blanket. Something about her posture, dignified even in sleep, protective of her belongings, struck him as achingly familiar. Then recognition hit like a physical blow. Victoria, his housekeeper, the woman who had been in his home every day for 3 years, who knew where he kept his emergency medication and how he liked his coffee, who had quietly cleaned wine stains from his carpet after his worst fights with Miranda. And she was sleeping in the park. Jonathan stood frozen, his world tilting on its axis. How had he never noticed? The careful way she rationed her lunch, eating only half and saving the rest. How she never took sick days or vacation time. The worn edges of her shoes, the way she flinched slightly when he raised his voice at business calls. She had been invisible to him, not because she wasn't there, but because he had trained himself not to see. Victoria stirred, perhaps sensing his presence. Her eyes opened slowly, the way people wake when they're not sure they're safe. Their gazes met across 10 feet of grass and gravel path, and Jonathan watched her face transform, surprise melting into mortification, then hardening into something that looked like defiance mixed with despair. "Mr. Ashworth." Her voice was steady, but he could see her hands trembling as she sat up. This isn't." She stopped, because what was there to say? The evidence was arranged around her like an indictment. The suitcases, the makeshift bed, the careful way she'd tried to make herself small and invisible even in homelessness. Jonathan felt something crack open in his chest, a sensation he hadn't experienced since he was 12 years old and found his grandfather crying in the garden after his grandmother's funeral. It was the feeling of witnessing someone else's private pain and realizing that your comfortable distance from human suffering was just another kind of blindness. Victoria, he said, and her name felt different in his mouth now. Not a label but a person, complex and real, and sitting 10 feet away with her dignity wrapped around her like armor. She stood up quickly, smoothing her uniform skirt, trying to reassemble the invisible barrier between employer and employee. I should explain. No, Jonathan said, stepping closer. I should. The silence stretched between them, heavy with 3 years of unspoken assumptions and unnoticed struggles. A late jogger passed, earbuds blocking out the world, and Jonathan realized he had been just like that, moving through life with noise canceling out the frequency of other people's pain. Victoria looked at him with eyes that had seen too much and hoped too little, and Jonathan understood with devastating clarity that this moment, finding her here, seeing her fully for the first time, was either going to destroy them both or save them. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent and eternal, while two people stood at the exact center of their own small universe, waiting to discover which direction their story would turn. How often do we mistake someone's professional composure for their complete emotional reality? Victoria's hands moved with practiced efficiency, folding her coat and checking the latches on her suitcases, as if she were simply tidying up after a picnic instead of dismantling her makeshift bedroom. The motion was automatic, a survival mechanism honed by years of making herself small in other people's spaces. There's nothing to explain, she said, her voice carrying the same professional tone she used when discussing his dry cleaning preferences. I'll be in tomorrow morning at the usual time. Nothing has to change. But everything had already changed, and they both knew it. Jonathan watched her hands shake slightly as she smoothed down her hair, trying to restore the invisible uniform that went beyond fabric, the careful posture that said I'm here to serve, not to be seen. The sight made his throat tight with something he couldn't name. Victoria, you don't understand, he began. I understand perfectly. She straightened, meeting his eyes with a look that was part pride, part plea. You saw something you weren't supposed to see. But I'm still the same person who cleaned your house this morning, and I'll be the same person who cleans it tomorrow. This, she gestured at the bench, the suitcases, the careful arrangement of her homelessness. This is temporary. The word hung in the air like a prayer that neither of them believed. Jonathan ran his hands through his hair, a gesture that would have cost him points in any board meeting. How long? He asked quietly. How long is it? How long have you been? He couldn't finish the sentence. The words felt obscene, homeless, sleeping rough, without a place to go. They reduced her struggle to clinical terms that couldn't capture the courage it took to maintain dignity while living on a park bench. Victoria's jaw tightened. That's not your concern, Mr. Ashworth. Isn't it? The question surprised them both with its intensity. You work in my house, you take care of my life, and I never even noticed that you were. What? Poor. The word cracked like a whip. Did you think I cleaned houses for intellectual stimulation? Did you imagine I chose to be invisible? Jonathan flinched. Her anger was clean and sharp, cutting through years of comfortable assumptions. I didn't think about it at all. Exactly. Victoria lifted one suitcase, testing its weight. And that's how it should stay. I don't need your pity, Mr. Ashworth. I need my job. She was running, he realized. Not physically, she was too proud for that, but emotionally, rebuilding the walls that had kept her safe in his house for 3 years. The walls that let her see everything about his life while remaining invisible on her own. This isn't about pity, Jonathan said, stepping closer. You can't sleep in the park. Watch me. The words carried 3 years of swallowed pride and careful smiles. I've been taking care of myself long before I started taking care of you. I'll figure it out. How? The question came out harder than he intended. How are you going to figure out sleeping on a bench in September when it's already getting cold at night? How are you going to shower before work, or keep your uniform clean, or... That's enough. Victoria's voice cut through his questions like a blade. You don't get to care about this now. You don't get to see me. The words hit him like a physical blow. What does that mean? It means that for 3 years I've been in your house 6 days a week, and you never once asked me how I was. Never asked if I had family or hobbies or dreams or problems. I was furniture that happened to have hands and could fold laundry. Her voice was steady, but he could see the tears she was refusing to shed. So don't stand there now and pretend you see me just because you caught me at my lowest moment. Jonathan felt something violent and protective surge in his chest, not toward her, but toward the man he'd been that morning. The man who'd drunk coffee she'd made while never wondering if she'd had breakfast. Who'd complained about his problems to phone calls while she'd quietly collected his scattered life into neat piles. "You're right," he said, and the admission felt like swallowing glass. "I didn't see you. But I see you now." "No." Victoria shook her head, hoisting her second suitcase. "You see a problem. You see something that disrupts your comfortable world where the help is invisible and grateful." "Well, I'm not grateful anymore, Mr. Ashworth. I'm tired." She started walking toward the park's main path, her suitcases bumping against her legs. Jonathan followed, his expensive shoes loud on the gravel. "Where are you going?" "To find another bench." Her voice carried a bitter laugh. "Don't worry. I'll make sure it's far enough away that you won't accidentally discover me again." "Victoria, stop." She turned back, and in the lamplight, he saw her face clearly. Not the careful mask she wore in his house, but the raw truth of someone holding herself together through sheer will. "Why? So can you offer me money? A hotel room for a few nights? Some temporary solution that lets you sleep better knowing you've done your good deed?" The accuracy of his half-formed thoughts made him flush with shame. "I thought so." Victoria adjusted her grip on her suitcases. "Save it for someone who still believes in fairy tales, Mr. Ashworth. I stopped believing in rescue a long time ago." She walked away, her silhouette disappearing into the shadows between streetlights. Jonathan stood alone beside the bench where she'd been sleeping, surrounded by the weight of 3 years of willful blindness and the devastating clarity of finally seeing someone he'd never bothered to look at. In the distance, a church bell chimed midnight, marking the end of one day and the beginning of another. Tomorrow, Victoria would show up at his house at 6 sharp, and they would both pretend this conversation never happened. Unless he found a way to prove that some people were worth seeing, even when, especially when, they didn't believe in rescue anymore. Victoria didn't come to work the next morning. At 6:15 a.m., Jonathan found himself standing in his kitchen, staring at the coffee maker that hadn't been programmed the night before. The silence felt different, not peaceful but accusatory. Every surface Victoria would have cleaned gleamed back at him like a mirror reflecting his own failure. By 6:30, he was in his car. He found her at the 24-hour diner on Washington Street, sitting in a corner booth with a single cup of coffee that had probably gone cold an hour ago. She was reading a paperback novel, her uniform pressed and perfect despite having no home to dress in. The sight made his chest ache. "Victoria." She looked up, and for a split second he saw relief flicker across her face before she shuddered it away. "Mr. Ashworth. I was planning to call." "Don't." He slid into the booth across from her, ignoring how she stiffened. "Are you quitting?" "I'm considering my options." The waitress appeared, coffee pot in hand. "More coffee, honey?" she asked Victoria with the easy familiarity of someone who'd been serving the same customer for hours. "Please." "And he'll have black coffee," Victoria said automatically, then caught herself. Even here, she was taking care of him. Jonathan waited until they were alone again. "What options?" Victoria closed her book, a romance novel with worn edges that spoke of multiple readings. "There's a cleaning service that needs someone for overnight office work. The pay is less, but they provide a cot in the supply room." "A cot in a supply room. It's better than a park bench." Her tone was matter-of-fact, but he caught the slight tremor in her voice. "No, it's not. It's what's available." Victoria lifted her coffee cup with both hands, a gesture he recognized from countless mornings watching her in his kitchen. "Not everyone gets to live in Beacon Hill, Mr. Ashworth. Come back to work." "Why?" The question was sharp. "So you can feel better about knowing where I sleep? So you can watch me dust your photographs and feel charitable?" Jonathan leaned forward. "Because I need you." The honesty in his voice surprised them both. Victoria set down her cup, studying his face with the careful attention she usually reserved for expensive antiques. You need your house cleaned. That's different. Is it? Jonathan asked, and realized he wasn't sure of the answer himself. Before Victoria could respond, the diner's television crackled to life with the morning news. The weather report promised heavy rain by evening, the kind of September storm that would turn park benches into islands of misery. They both heard it, both understood what it meant. The supply room has a roof, Victoria said quietly. So does my house. Your house isn't an option. Why not? Victoria laughed, but there was no humor in it. Because I know the difference between a job and charity. Because I've seen what happens when people like me accept help from people like you. Because I'd rather sleep in a supply closet than become someone's pet project. The words hit him like a slap, partly because they stung with accuracy. How many charity galas had he attended, writing checks for causes that felt safely distant? How many times had he confused money with caring, donation with connection? What if it wasn't charity? He asked. Then what would it be? Jonathan found himself without an answer. What was he offering? What was he asking for? The space between them felt charged with questions neither knew how to voice. The rain started while they sat in silence, light drops tapping against the diner's windows like an insistent reminder. Victoria glanced outside, and Jonathan saw her shoulders tense. I should go, she said, reaching for her purse. Where? To see about that cleaning job. In this rain? With your suitcases? Victoria's jaw tightened. I've managed worse. But as if the universe had been listening, the sky opened up completely. Rain pounded the diner's roof and turned the street into a river. The few customers huddled closer to their coffee cups, clearly settling in to wait out the storm. Looks like you're stuck here for a while, the waitress said, refilling their cups without being asked. This kind of storm usually lasts hours. Victoria stared out at the deluge, her reflection ghost-like in the rain-streaked glass. Jonathan could see her calculating how long the storm would last, how much coffee she could afford to buy to justify occupying the booth, whether her suitcases would survive being dragged through the flood. I have a car, he said quietly. I'm not going to your house. Then where? The question hung between them like a challenge. Victoria had nowhere to go that wouldn't cost money she didn't have. Jonathan had everywhere to go, but nowhere he wanted to be. There's a library branch that opens at 10, Victoria said finally. I can wait there until the storm passes. With your suitcases? They allow personal belongings. Jonathan watched her face as she spoke, seeing the careful way she'd mapped out her day around free spaces and public restrooms. The quiet dignity of someone who'd learned to be homeless without losing her humanity. I have a guest house, he said suddenly. Above the garage. It's been empty for years. Victoria's eyes snapped to him. Mr. Ashworth. It needs to be cleaned anyway. Consider it a work assignment. I'm not. You're not what? Not desperate enough to accept shelter from a storm? Not tired enough to want a real bed? Not human enough to deserve basic dignity? The words came out harsher than he'd intended, but they stopped her protests. In the silence that followed, the rain drummed against the windows like an impatient audience waiting for their decision. Victoria looked at him for a long moment, and Jonathan felt like he was being weighed and measured against some internal scale he couldn't see. Just until the storm passes, she said finally. Just until the storm passes, he agreed, though they both knew that some storms change everything in their path, and there was no going back to the way things were before. The guest house above the garage hadn't been opened in 2 years. Jonathan fumbled with the keys while Victoria stood behind him, her suitcases creating small puddles on the covered landing. The rain had followed them from the diner like a persistent shadow, drumming against the roof with increasing intensity. My sister used to stay here, he said, finally getting the door open. When she visited from California. The space beyond was frozen in time, dust covers over furniture, family photographs still arranged on side tables, a half-finished crossword puzzle left on the kitchen counter. Sunlight filtered through rain-streaked windows, revealing a cozy apartment that felt more like home than his mansion ever had. Victoria stepped inside slowly, her professional eye automatically cataloging what needed attention. "It's lovely," she said, and meant it. "There are clean linens in the closet. The kitchen should have basics, coffee, tea, and some canned goods." Jonathan moved around the space, pulling off dust covers with awkward efficiency. "The shower works, and there's a washer and dryer in the closet." "Mr. Ashworth." Victoria's voice was quiet. "Why?" He paused, a dust cover half folded in his hands. "Why what? Why are you doing this? And don't say it's because you need the space cleaned." Jonathan set down the cover and walked to the window overlooking his house. From here, he could see into his own kitchen, where he'd eaten breakfast alone for the past 3 years while she'd prepared his coffee and collected his dishes. "Do you have children?" he asked suddenly. The question caught Victoria off guard. Yes. A daughter." "Where is she?" Victoria's hands tightened on her purse strap. "That's personal. So we are sleeping in parks, but here we are." The observation was gentle, but it landed like a challenge. Victoria walked to the opposite window, looking out at the garden she'd watched him never visit. "She's at Howard University," Victoria said finally. "Pre-med program. Full scholarship. That's incredible. You must be proud." "I am." Victoria's voice carried a fierce love that transformed her face. "She's brilliant. Always was, even as a little girl. She'd rather read medical journals than fairy tales." "Does she know about—" Jonathan gestured vaguely. "About my situation?" Victoria's laugh was sharp. "No. She thinks I work for a nice family who provides housing. She thinks I live in the main house, in my own room with my own bathroom and a view of the garden." The weight of the lie hung between them. "I send her money every month," Victoria continued. "For books, for lab fees, for the little extras that scholarships don't cover. She calls me every Sunday and tells me about her classes, her friends, her dreams of becoming a pediatric surgeon. And I sit wherever I can find Wi-Fi and pretend I'm calling from my beautiful room in my employer's house." Jonathan felt something crack open in his chest. "Victoria." "Her name is Jasmine," she said, pulling out her phone. The screen was cracked, but the photo was clear. A young woman with Victoria's eyes and a radiant smile, wearing a white coat and stethoscope. "She looks like her father." "Thank God." "Why thank God?" Victoria was quiet for so long that Jonathan thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Because I failed her once already. Because she was 8 years old, and I couldn't protect her from seeing her mama get evicted from our apartment because I chose to pay for her asthma medication instead of rent. Because she had to sleep in a car for 3 nights while I figured out how to put our lives back together." The rain outside seemed to intensify, as if the sky was weeping for the memory. "She made me promise," Victoria continued, "when she left for college, that I would never let that happen again, that I would always have a safe place to come home to, that I was done sacrificing my stability for everyone else's needs. But you lost your apartment. 3 months ago, my landlord sold the building to developers. My new job with you doesn't pay enough for the rent increases in this city, but it pays enough to keep sending Jasmine money and maintain the fiction that her mother has her life together." Jonathan turned from the window to face her fully. "So you chose her stability over yours." "I chose her dreams over my comfort. There's a difference." The simple statement revealed everything. The careful budgeting, the extra hours, the way she'd never taken a sick day or asked for a raise. She'd been slowly dissolving her own life to preserve her daughter's future. "She doesn't have to know," Victoria said, as if reading his thoughts. "Jasmine thinks I live in luxury, and she can focus on her studies instead of worrying about me. In 2 years, she'll graduate and start her residency, and I can figure out something more permanent then. 2 years of sleeping wherever you can find space. 2 years of making sure my daughter becomes the doctor she's meant to be." Jonathan walked to the bookshelf, where his sister's medical textbooks still stood in neat rows. "Lauren was pre-med too," he said quietly, before she decided the family business was more important than her own dreams. "What happened to her?" "She married someone our parents approved of and moved to California. Sends Christmas cards with pictures of her perfect house and her perfect children. Call twice a year and ask how the company is doing. His voice carried an old sadness. I haven't seen her smile, really smile, since she was 22. Victoria studied his profile. Is that why you're helping me? Because I remind you of your sister? No, Jonathan said, turning to meet her eyes. I'm helping you because you remind me of everything I've forgotten about courage. The admission hung in the air between them, fragile and true. Outside, the storm showed no signs of stopping, but inside the guest house, two people were beginning to see each other with a clarity that had nothing to do with employer and employee, and everything to do with the stories we tell ourselves to survive. The storm lasted 3 days. On the first day, Victoria tried to maintain professional distance. She cleaned the guest house with the same methodical precision she brought to the main house, transforming the dusty space into something warm and welcoming. Jonathan brought groceries and left them by the door like an offering, never staying long enough for conversation. On the second day, the power went out. Victoria was reading by candlelight when she heard the knock. Jonathan stood in the doorway with a battery-powered radio and a thermos of hot coffee, his hair damp from the short dash between buildings. Thought you might want to know what's happening out there, he said, holding up the radio. The whole neighborhood's dark. She accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warm metal. How long are they saying? Could be until tomorrow. He hesitated in the doorway. I could start a fire in the main house. The fireplace actually works. I'm fine here. I know you are. Jonathan stepped inside, shaking raindrops from his jacket. But I'm not. I keep thinking about what you said about courage, about the stories we tell ourselves. Victoria set down the thermos and studied his face in the candlelight. Without the perfect lighting of his house or office, he looked younger, more uncertain, more human. What stories do you tell yourself, Mr. Ashworth? That I earned everything I have, that I worked harder than everyone else, that I deserve my success. He sat down across from her, the small table between them feeling both like a barrier and a bridge. But the truth is, I inherited a name and a network and opportunities that most people never get. I've been coasting on my grandfather's accomplishments for so long that I forgot what it felt like to actually try for something. Victoria poured coffee for both of them from the thermos. What did you want to try for? I wanted to teach. History. I had this idea that I could make the past come alive for kids, help them understand how we got here and where we might go. Jonathan laughed softly. My father said it was a waste of my education. Said teachers were for people who couldn't do anything else. Your father was wrong. The simple statement, delivered without hesitation, hit Jonathan with unexpected force. When was the last time someone had contradicted his father's judgment without qualification or apology? You really think so? I know so. Victoria leaned forward slightly. Do you know what Jasmine said to me when she decided on pre-med? She said her biology teacher in high school changed her life. Made her believe she could be anything she wanted to be. That teacher, Mrs. Patterson, drove an old Honda and brought her lunch in a brown bag, but she was the most powerful person in my daughter's world. Jonathan felt something shift inside his chest, like a door opening after years of being locked. What made you want to teach? Same thing that made you want to, I think. The belief that every person has something valuable inside them, and sometimes they just need someone to help them find it. Victoria's smile was soft in the candlelight. I taught 4th grade for 8 years. Best job I ever had. What happened? Budget cuts. Last hired, first fired. Her voice carried old pain but no bitterness. I applied everywhere, but the market was flooded with experienced teachers who'd been laid off. Eventually, I took cleaning jobs to pay the bills, and one day turned into 3 years. Do you miss it? Every day. Victoria's eyes brightened as she talked. I miss the way kids see the world. Everything's possible, everything's interesting. I miss helping them figure out that reading isn't about decoding words. It's about discovering that someone else has felt exactly what they're feeling. Jonathan found himself leaning forward, drawn into her passion. What was your favorite thing to teach? Poetry. They'd all grown at first, But then I'd show them how lyrics are just poems set to music. How Dr. Seuss was really a master of rhythm and rhyme. How even text messages have their own poetry if you know how to look. Victoria gestured expressively, her professional mask completely gone. By the end of the year, they'd be writing their own verses, finding music in ordinary words. That's beautiful. That's teaching. Victoria's expression grew wistful. It's seeing potential everywhere and helping people discover they're capable of things they never imagined. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the rain and the distant sound of emergency sirens. The candlelight created an intimate space that felt separate from the world outside. No employer and employee, no class differences, just two people sharing their deepest truths. "Can I ask you something?" Jonathan said. "You've been asking me things all evening. This is different." He turned the coffee cup in his hands. "When you look at me, what do you see?" Victoria was quiet for so long that Jonathan began to regret the question. When she finally spoke, her voice was gentle but honest. "I see someone who's forgotten how to want things for himself. Someone who's been told who he should be for so long that he's lost track of who he is." She paused. "But I also saw someone who sat in a diner for 4 hours just to make sure I didn't have to face a storm alone. Someone who's trying to figure out how to care about people instead of just managing them." Jonathan felt exposed and understood at the same time. "And what do you see when you look in the mirror?" "A woman who's been so busy taking care of everyone else that she forgot she deserved to be taken care of too." Victoria's smile was rueful. "A mother who's so afraid of failing her daughter that she's failing herself. But also," she paused, considering, "someone who's stronger than she thought she was." The candle between them flickered as if touched by a gentle breeze, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, the storm continued, but inside, two people were discovering that the most profound intimacy sometimes comes not from physical closeness, but from the courage to be completely honest about who you are when no one is watching. "Thank you," Jonathan said quietly. "For what?" "For letting me see you. The real you." Victoria met his eyes across the small table. "Thank you for looking." The photograph arrived on the 4th morning, delivered with Jonathan's usual stack of business correspondence. Victoria was in the main house kitchen, preparing breakfast and humming softly, the first time Jonathan had heard her make any sound that wasn't strictly professional. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean and gleaming, and something had shifted between them in those candlelit hours. Not romance exactly, but recognition. Connection. Jonathan was reading through contracts when his assistant knocked and entered with the mail, her expression carefully neutral in the way that meant she was holding back gossip. "The morning delivery, sir. And there are some photographers outside the gate." Jonathan looked up sharply. "Photographers?" She handed him a manila envelope with no return address. Inside was a single photograph and a note typed on expensive stationery. The photo showed him and Victoria in the diner 4 days ago, their heads bent close together in conversation. The angle made it look intimate, conspiratorial. The note was brief and devastating. "Thought you should see what the staff are saying about your new living arrangements. Miranda is quite upset. Perhaps it's time to remember your position in society." "A friend." Jonathan's blood turned to ice water. He looked up to find Victoria standing in the doorway, a cup of coffee in her hands and concern on her face. "Mr. Ashworth? Is everything all right?" Before he could answer, his phone rang. Miranda's name flashed on the screen like a warning. "Jonathan, what the hell is this?" Miranda's voice was sharp enough to cut glass, loud enough that Victoria could hear every word. "There are pictures of you with some woman plastered all over social media. People are calling me asking if we're still engaged." Victoria's face went pale. She set down the coffee cup and took a step backward, understanding immediately what was happening. "Miranda, I can explain." "Explain?" "Explain how my fiancé is having cozy coffee dates with the help. Do you have any idea how this looks?" The word help hit Victoria like a physical blow. Jonathan watched her expression close off, watched her rebuild the walls he'd spent 3 days helping her tear down. "She's not," Jonathan began, but Miranda wasn't finished. I've already had 3 calls from board members asking if this affects the merger. The Nakamura deal could fall apart if they think you're having some sort of midlife crisis with the cleaning lady. Victoria turned and walked out of the kitchen. Jonathan heard her footsteps on the stairs, quick and purposeful. Miranda, stop. No, you stop. I've spent 2 years building our social calendar, our reputation, our future. I will not have it destroyed because you decided to play savior to some desperate woman who's obviously trying to trap you. Jonathan ended the call and ran after Victoria, taking the stairs to the guest house 2 at a time. He found her throwing clothes into her suitcases with mechanical efficiency, her face a mask of professional composure. Victoria, don't do this. Do what? Leave. She didn't look up from her packing. I should have left days ago. I should never have accepted your help. The photograph doesn't mean anything. It's just someone trying to cause trouble. It means everything. Victoria's voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. It means I was right the first time. It means this was always going to end exactly the way these things always end. What way? She finally looked at him, and the pain in her eyes was devastating. With me being reminded of my place. That's not what this is. Isn't it? Victoria grabbed her toiletries from the bathroom. Your fiancée just called me for help. She's worried about what the board will think. She's afraid I'm trying to trap you. Tell me, Mr. Ashworth, which part of that sounds unfamiliar? Jonathan felt like he was drowning. She doesn't know you. She doesn't understand. She understands perfectly. A black woman with nothing to her name gets close to a wealthy white man, and obviously she must be scheming. Obviously she's the problem. Victoria's laugh was bitter. The only thing she got wrong is thinking I wanted to trap you. I just wanted to survive until my daughter graduates. Victoria, please. Please what? Please pretend this isn't about race and class, and the fact that people like me don't get fairy tale endings with people like you. Please ignore the fact that your engagement and your business deals are more important than whether I have a place to sleep. That's not true. Then prove it. Victoria turned to face him fully, her suitcase clasped in both hands. Call Miranda back. Tell her you're not engaged anymore. Tell the board that your personal life is none of their business. Choose this, choose me, over everything else. The words hung in the air like a challenge, and Jonathan felt the weight of his entire life pressing down on him. The company his grandfather built. The marriage his parents expected. The social position he'd inherited along with his trust fund. He began and stopped. Victoria watched his hesitation, and something inside her eyes died. I thought so. You don't understand the pressure. I understand pressure. Victoria's voice was quiet now, deadly calm. I understand choosing between rent and groceries. I understand working 6 days a week for people who don't see you as human. I understand sleeping on benches and lying to your daughter about having a home. What I don't understand is choosing comfort over courage. She walked toward the door, and Jonathan felt panic rising in his throat. Where will you go? That's not your problem anymore, Mr. Ashworth. Victoria paused in the doorway, her back to him. Thank you for the reminder of why I stopped believing in rescue. It was almost nice to forget for a while. She walked down the stairs and into the morning sunlight, leaving Jonathan alone in the guest house with the lingering scent of her perfume and the devastating understanding that he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Through the window, he could see photographers still gathered at his gate, their cameras ready to document whatever came next. In a few hours, Victoria would be back to sleeping wherever she could find shelter, and he would be back to his empty mansion, his loveless engagement, and his comfortable, suffocating life. He had chosen safety over everything that mattered, and the taste of that choice was ashes in his mouth. For 3 days, Jonathan tried to return to his old life. He attended the emergency board meeting where concerned investors questioned his judgment and associations. He sat through Miranda's tearful manipulation about their reputation and their future. He signed papers and made decisions and pretended that his world hadn't fundamentally shifted the moment he saw Victoria sleeping on that park bench. But every morning at 6 a.m., he found himself standing in his kitchen, waiting for coffee that wouldn't be made and listening for footsteps that wouldn't come. The house felt like a mausoleum. On Thursday evening, he drove past the 24-hour diner. Victoria wasn't there. He checked the park, the library, and the shelter downtown. Nothing. She had vanished as completely as if she'd never existed, taking with her the only conversations he'd had in years that made him remember who he used to want to be. Friday morning brought the engagement party planning session. Miranda spread fabric samples across his dining room table like battle plans, her voice bright with the kind of determined cheer that brooked no opposition. "Ivory or champagne for the linens?" she asked, holding up swatches. "The photographer says ivory photographs are better, but champagne is more sophisticated." Jonathan stared at the squares of expensive fabric, thinking about Victoria reading poetry to fourth graders, about the way her eyes lit up when she talked about teaching, about the courage it took to sleep on a park bench rather than accept charity. "Jonathan?" Miranda's voice carried an edge of impatience. "The caterer needs to know by noon." "Why are we doing this?" he asked quietly. "Because it's our engagement party. Because people expect it. Because this is how these things are done." Miranda's tone suggested she was explaining something obvious to someone slow. "But why are we getting married?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Miranda set down the fabric samples and studied his face with the calculating expression she usually reserved for seating charts. "Because we make sense together. Because we have the same background, the same goals, the same social circle. Because marriage is a partnership, and we're both good at partnerships." "Do you love me?" Miranda's laugh was bright and hollow. "What does that have to do with anything? Love is what people who don't have options tell themselves they need. We have everything. Why complicate it with fairy tales?" Jonathan looked at her, really looked, and saw a woman who had never once asked him how he was feeling, who had never shown curiosity about his dreams or fears, who saw him as a role to be filled rather than a person to be known. Beautiful, accomplished, perfect Miranda, who would give him exactly the life he was supposed to want and nothing resembling the life that might actually make him happy. "I can't do this," he said. Miranda's composure cracked slightly. "Can't do what? Pick between ivory and champagne? It's not that complicated, Jonathan. Any of it. The engagement, the party, the life you're planning for us. I can't pretend anymore." "Pretend what?" Her voice was getting sharper. "That I want this. That I want you. That I'm the man you think you're marrying." Miranda stood up so quickly that fabric samples scattered to the floor like fallen leaves. "This is about her, isn't it? That woman from the photograph. You're throwing away everything we've built for some fantasy about your cleaning lady?" "Her name is Victoria," Jonathan said quietly. "And she's not a fantasy. She's the most real person I've ever met. She's a homeless maid who saw an opportunity and took it. She's a teacher who lost her job, a mother who's sacrificing everything for her daughter's future, a woman with more integrity in her little finger than I have in my entire body." Jonathan felt something break open in his chest, not painful but liberating. "And you're right. I am throwing this away for her. You're insane. You'll lose everything. The company will never accept her. Society will never accept her. Your family will disown you." "Good," Jonathan said, and the word tasted like freedom. "Maybe it's time I stopped living my grandfather's life and started living my own." Miranda stared at him as if he'd announced his intention to join the circus. "Where is she now? This paragon of virtue who's turned your head?" "I don't know." "You don't know?" Miranda's laugh was incredulous. "You're destroying your life for a woman you can't even find." Jonathan walked to the window overlooking the garden, the same garden Victoria had tended with invisible hands for 3 years. "Then I guess I better start looking." Behind him, he heard Miranda gathering her things with sharp, angry movements. "When you come to your senses," she said, "when you realize what you've thrown away for some ridiculous middle-aged fantasy, don't expect me to take you back." "I won't," Jonathan said without turning around. The front door slammed with enough force to rattle the windows. Jonathan stood alone in his mansion, surrounded by expensive furniture and empty rooms, and felt lighter than he had in years. His phone buzzed with a text from his assistant. Board meeting moved to Monday. Legal needs to discuss merger implications. Jonathan deleted the message and scrolled through his contacts until he found the number he needed. It rang 3 times before a warm, professional voice answered. Boston Public Schools, Human Resources. Hello, Jonathan said, his voice steadier than it had been in days. I'd like to speak to someone about substitute teaching positions. Specifically, I'd like to know if you have any need for a history teacher. Can you hold, please? I can hold, Jonathan said, looking out at the garden where someone who had never been properly thanked had created beauty for someone who had never bothered to notice. He had a woman to find, a life to rebuild, and 38 years of sleeping through his own existence to make up for. It was time to stop choosing comfort and start choosing courage. It was time to prove that some people were worth changing everything for. Jonathan found her at Roosevelt Elementary School on a Tuesday afternoon in October. She was reading to a circle of second graders in the library, her voice bringing life to a story about a brave little mouse who discovered she was stronger than she knew. The children hung on every word, their faces upturned like flowers following the sun. Victoria wore a simple blue dress and a volunteer badge, her hair pulled back in a way that made her look both professional and approachable. She was luminous. Jonathan stood in the doorway, his heart hammering against his ribs. He'd been searching for 3 weeks, calling shelters, visiting community centers, following leads that went nowhere. His assistant had quit when he'd insisted on spending his days looking for that woman instead of attending meetings. The board was threatening a vote of no confidence. Miranda had already announced their mutual decision to postpone the engagement indefinitely. He'd never been happier in his life. Victoria finished the story and looked up to find the children applauding. That's when she saw him. The book slipped from her hands, and for a moment, her carefully constructed composure cracked, revealing surprise, wariness, and something that might have been hope. Miss Victoria, one of the children tugged at her sleeve. Are you okay? I'm fine, sweetheart. Victoria's voice was steady, but Jonathan could see her hands trembling as she gathered the books. Why don't you all go find Mrs. Henderson? Tell her story time is finished. The children scattered with the easy energy of youth, leaving Victoria and Jonathan alone among the picture books and tiny chairs. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything that had happened and everything left unsaid. How did you find me? Victoria asked finally. I called every school in the city asking about volunteer readers. Roosevelt was number 43 on my list. Jonathan stepped into the library, his expensive shoes silent on the colorful carpet. You kept your promise to that little girl in your class, didn't you? About finding a way back to teaching. Victoria's smile was small but genuine. Turns out there are lots of ways to teach if you're willing to do it for free. The librarian here lets me run reading programs twice a week. And where are you staying? Her face shuddered slightly. That's not your concern anymore, Mr. Ashworth. Jonathan. My name is Jonathan, and everything about you is my concern. He moved closer, noting the shadows under her eyes, the way her clothes hung slightly loose, the careful way she held herself. Victoria, I made a mistake. The biggest mistake of my life. You made a choice. There's a difference. Then let me choose again. Jonathan knelt down so they were at eye level, his knees folding awkwardly in the tiny space. I called off the engagement. I told the board that my personal life wasn't up for committee vote. I quit managing my grandfather's company and applied to be a substitute teacher. Victoria's eyes widened. You did what? I chose courage over comfort. I chose truth over convenience. I chose, his voice caught. I chose you, even when I didn't know where you were or if you'd ever forgive me. Jonathan. Victoria's voice was barely a whisper. You don't understand what you're saying. You can't just abandon your entire life for what? For love? For the chance to wake up every morning next to someone who sees me as a person instead of a portfolio? For the possibility of building something real with someone who knows what real struggle looks like? Jonathan reached for her hands, and she didn't pull away. Victoria, I've been sleepwalking through my life for 38 years. You woke me up. Tears were sliding down Victoria's cheeks now, and she didn't try to stop them. It won't be easy. People will stare, will whisper, and will question everything about us. Let them. Jonathan's thumbs traced gentle circles on her knuckles. I've spent my whole life caring what other people think. I'm done. I have nothing to offer you. No money, no connections, no. You have everything. Jonathan's voice was fierce. You have wisdom and strength and a heart big enough to sacrifice everything for the people you love. You have stories that could change children's lives and dreams worth fighting for. You have the courage to sleep on park benches rather than compromise your dignity. Victoria laughed through her tears. When you put it like that, marry me. The words surprised them both. Victoria's breath caught, and Jonathan felt his future hanging in the balance. We barely know each other, she whispered. I know you read poetry to fourth graders and make the perfect cup of coffee and would rather be homeless than accept charity. I know you love your daughter more than your own comfort and that you see potential in everyone, even spoiled billionaires who forgot how to be human. Jonathan's voice was steady now, certain. I know that 3 days with you taught me more about who I want to be than 38 years of being who I was supposed to be. Victoria studied his face, searching for doubt or reservation. She found only the truth. What about Jasmine? What about? I've been thinking about that too. Jonathan smiled. There's a guest house that needs a permanent resident, and a daughter who deserves to know her mother is loved and cherished and never has to choose between her own stability and her child's dreams ever again. Victoria was crying openly now, her professional composure completely abandoned. You really mean it? All of it? Every word? Jonathan leaned closer. The question is, are you brave enough to let someone rescue you? Are you willing to believe that sometimes fairy tales come true, even for women who stop believing in them? Victoria looked around the library, at the books that had been her sanctuary and the children's artwork that decorated the walls. She'd been building one volunteer hour at a time, and the man who'd chosen to dismantle his entire world for the chance to build something new with her. Yes, she whispered. Yes to all of it. When Jonathan kissed her, it tasted like coffee and courage, and the kind of love that changes everything. Around them, picture books whispered stories of brave princesses and unexpected heroes, and somewhere in the distance, a little girl who would grow up to be a doctor smiled in her dorm room as her mother called with the most wonderful news. Love, it turned out, was worth the wait. Sometimes the greatest act of courage is not saving someone else, but allowing yourself to be saved. What would change in your life if you believed you were worth rescuing?